Okay, everyone, welcome to today's webinar. The title of our webinar today, Improving DevOps Collaboration on Major Incident Response and Problem Management. Today's webinar is brought to you by ISOS Technology, Atlassian, and Star CIO. A little bit about this webinar. It is a live webinar. Yes, we are recording it, so it will be available afterward. There will be time for Q&A at the end of it. So please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom to be able to ask a question, and I will do my best to answer as many of them at the end of today's session. Hello, my name is Isaac Sokolik. I am the president of Star CIO. I am a former CTO and CIO. I'm a writer and a speaker. I do a lot of work in Agile and DevOps, and I'm very happy to be joining you to moderate this panel of esteemed colleagues. Welcome to the panel, Eddie Webinaro. He's a solutions engineer at Atlassian. Say hello, Eddie.
Hi, thanks, Isaac.
And welcome, Thad West. Welcome back. He's the CEO at ISOS Technology.
Hey, Isaac. Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are.
Great. So I've been really excited about this particular webinar because so many organizations that I work with are investing in more application development. Their applications require a lot more higher reliability. They're core to the business. And now we have a lot more people working from home and working remotely. And things are going to change dramatically over the next 3, 6, 12 months as we get used to this new way of working. So the collaboration between Agile and DevOps and IT Ops is so important. But yet we always find ourselves in the midst of some form of firefighting. And I'm wondering, guys, has the firefighting gotten worse? Are there more incidents? Are problem solving harder for us to do? I know we have more apps to support, and I know we have greater business expectations, but how do we get ourselves out of this firefighting mode? Eddie, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, sure. So it's hard to say it's gotten worse because I think in a lot of ways our industry has shown a lot of maturity. I mean, we see the way that big companies are handling incidents and publishing their postmortems. I think there's a lot of discipline there that's come a long way. But at the same time, it's certainly gotten much more dynamic. It's gotten, the complexity has grown, right? And I think, if I actually think about my own experience as a support engineer, the first time I ever got that support pager, and it actually rang, right? When that support pager goes off, the sheer terror you feel in that moment. But I also remember it was a pretty scripted approach we had, right? It was, you started with the application, and if there was anything that stuck out in the application, maybe you restarted it or addressed it. And if not, you moved on to the app server layer. You looked for something that stuck out there, you moved on to the physical server, right? A piece of metal connected in your data center. And if that had CPU, and that had memory, and that had disk, you were probably good to go. Maybe you restarted it just to be safe. And if all those layers look good, you kind of pointed to a network or database, which fortunately for me were some other teams concerned, and they kind of wholly own that domain and they would handle that investigation. So, you know, I kind of joked about restarting everything there, but I think it was a pretty common technique 10 or 12 years ago, right? And I think it was tolerated because it was a common technique, and it was a common technique because it was tolerated. But that's changed a lot, right? Everything now is much more federated with microservices, and so the technology itself has gotten more complex. More teams are involved. I can actually think of the last incident I was on, and there were 7 teams just at the application level trying to figure out which application was actually causing that problem before we got to any of those lower levels. And so I think that's been a big change. And again, it's not necessarily worse, but it's definitely more complex and more dynamic. And I think at the same time, our customer expectations are much higher. That, you know, let's try and restart it and wait 10 minutes and see what happens isn't really a viable response anymore. Customers just aren't going to tolerate that kind of outage.
Yeah. Thad, what are you seeing in terms of just the types of applications people are supporting in IT Ops?
Yeah, you know, I mean, just to kind of build on what Eddie's talking about is you look at the landscape of the applications out there, and, you know, a lot of what we're responsible for and make our organizations tick live inside and outside of our firewall. So it's a very complex tool chain. You might have Salesforce on the outside talking to an ERP that's hosted on the outside or hosted on the inside, and your project tools could be inside and outside. So you have this really complex chain of tools that also all talk to each other, right? So it's not like one of those tools goes out. One of those tools goes out and it's 15 things downstream break. And so, that complexity is just really echoed there.
Yeah, and so Eddie, tell me a little bit more about the stress you described, right? I remember my first on-page call. I remember walking into war rooms where I know nothing about the technology and having to solve a very difficult issue. What's that like?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I think on top of the complexity of the environment changing now and adding to that stress and kind of feeling like we each individually know less about the domain that we're trying to solve, I think at the same time, and this is a good thing generally, we've become much more closely aligned to the business value of the application we're supporting, right? We've seen a lot, I think, in the agile and DevOps culture about really owning that value stream. So now it's not just some app that's down or crashing, it's that critical business service, that enables our billing and all of our e-commerce websites is down right now. And that adds a layer, I think, of anxiety and panic to those incident response scenarios.
So that's good news. I mean, at least IT is understanding their importance of keeping the lights on, keeping applications reliable. But I want to also switch to the next question, so, what's really expected of IT compared to a few years ago? I know we're saying that it's far more important, these applications, but, the business needs and the KPIs, we have this intersection between Agile, who has to try to deploy applications faster and more reliable and more frequent, in IT ops that has this other side of making things serviceable and manageable. How are we resolving these two paradoxes of move fast, deploy quickly, and keep things supportable? What do you think that in terms of customers and how they're handling those pressures?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think you started to touch on it a little bit. Those expectations are agility with the IT teams. Be more responsive, be more flexible. And it's really adopting the business needs, not just kind of the stale operational aspects they had of password reset and restarting servers, right? It's really adapting and providing value to the organization. And when you start to think about that in a DevOps context, specifically things like change processes, they can't be hard or a blocker, right? But they can't be bypassed either. So you still need this safety and security, and the reasons why you're doing change control and have an auditable process around that are still valid, but they have to be streamlined and efficient if you're going to have an efficient organization. The reality is people want to get more through the pipeline faster, but they also want to get it through there safer. So I know faster and safer don't always go together, but that's really the demand that's kind of pushed on that. You've talked a little bit about how to measure, and so you can start to look at things like simple things like number of deployments, and you can Google and see how many deployments, thousands of deployments Netflix and Amazon do a year. But that's most of us don't operate at that pace. Imagine if your organization is doing 4 deployments a year. How impactful to your business would it be if you could get to 8 deployments a year, right? I mean, that's a huge leap in productivity and responsiveness to your business. Another good way to think about measuring it is just in time saved. So we did a project for a large private university. They had their change control process. They had an hour and a half to 2-hour meeting once a week with over 100 people on it. So you do the math, and that's 800 hours a month. That meeting went away when we worked with them to rework and revamp their process. It went down to, how do we make this efficient through the tools? How do we do collaboration through the tools? And we freed up an hour and a half to 2 hours of a week for over 100 people.
I just can't even picture walking into that meeting, and people must have loved having to show up for this thing. And it's a break, but the reality is we still have the pressure to deploy and to support, and yet we're all stuck at 100 of us in a meeting that long. But Eddie, tell me about this. Doubling the number of deployments is great, but deployments is just the beginning, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. It's funny. I think with a lot of what Thad's saying, it's the idea that our business has actually become smarter consumers over time. They expect more and more of IT, right? So it's not just that they wish we could get it, faster and more often, but they expect it and they demand it, right? That's the baseline expectation now. And earlier on, I think in Agile adopted a lean concept of, well, the way that we solve that is by addressing this last mile, right? Which is all the time and effort it takes to get a built application into production, right? And I remember And when I worked for a large enterprise, that was typically anywhere from 30 to 90 days of just good inventory sitting on a shelf, chewing up money and not generating any value for the company. But I think as we were able to get that down to, 1 month, 2 weeks, 1 week, 1 day, 15 minutes, we're getting really good at throwing stuff over the fence, the proverbial fence, much more quickly, which is great on the kind of software side. But we're realizing, and I think probably everyone on this call already knows, that's really just the start, right? Because it's not getting the software into production that's valuable. It's that software remaining available, stable, reliable, and providing your user experiences that's really valuable for your organization. So I really see there's a lot of good change that came with teams kind of federating and adopting agile and becoming more and more empowered. But when we think about it from the enterprise perspective, I think kind of a caveat to that is we're actually losing a layer of control, because it's no longer possible to kind of have those big review boards that was talking about, which were actually really great for creating alignment and awareness, right? So as you take away these processes and you have all these distributed teams doing all these crazy things, how do you try and regain some of that control and really push the insight and awareness that our teams need to be effective in that, post-deployment operational status?
Yeah, look, I love that story. I mean, it's, most businesses don't need to be like Google, but we know getting from 4 to 8 releases is so instrumental. And what we're really talking about is this intersection of, I want to go faster, but I also want to be smarter, and I also want to be safer. And, it's not just about the agile speed of delivery. It's not just about automating things so that we have fewer defects and we have fewer issues when we deploy, but it's also making things super supportable. So, I played the role of the CIO. I really want to get your opinion on this. I'm the CIO. I'm all in for this idea of collaboration, but we have Agile and we have Jira software to manage it. I buy we need a DevOps culture and practice, but I can't have all that good washed away when systems aren't operating or as expected. So what's missing here, right? We're doing all this Agile and DevOps, but I'm still getting incidents and problems when things are running in production. So Eddie, where do we start from here to solve this?
I think it's true, and it's great that our teams are working much more effectively together than they ever have, right? We've seen that big culture push to really pull teams together and work effectively. But I think, unfortunately, the bad news is that your data is probably not playing that nicely, right? I think the reality for a lot of our organizations is that the data behind these teams, specifically our service management data and our DevOps tooling data, are still very siloed in the way that our team used to be, right? And when our teams used to be siloed, we tried this manual process of the review boards that I talked about to try and create this alignment and share the information that's needed. That doesn't scale. It didn't scale, and we're moving away from that. But so the good news now is, well, how do we solve this challenge going forward? There's great tooling out there, tools like JSD that are merging this idea of service management data and DevOps data to the same place where everyone is already working and planning from the same context. And so this means that we can leverage those insights. We can leverage the service insights and the DevOps insights to achieve the same transparency we want with far less overhead and friction.
Yeah, and so Thad, tell me, how far can organizations take this notion of service management and going from customer all the way into operations?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's great question and great way to kind of piece it together. So from our last webinar in this series, we talked with Chris at Evolve IP, and he was touching very much on this. Evolve IP is a technology company, global presence. Their motto is work anywhere. I mean, how great is that in this day and age, right? But as they were full stack on the Atlassian tools, except for JSD. And so when they were looking at going and moving to JSD, they knew they had some problems in their process, but really they had an aha moment. Chris had this aha moment that, hey, you know what we're really missing here is this feedback loop from our customers either being external or internal, right? So what was the real key for them was getting that feedback loop, getting that in a meaningful way back to the dev and to the ops teams, not just having it stop at service management and, hey, it's off in dev land and you'll hear from us in 2 months, right? They wanted a better experience for their community, and it's really part of that whole culture shift. So if you think about it, it's enabled by tools, but it really is this culture shift of being more responsive, delivering better software faster, and also, DevOps at some point kind of forgot about the customer, right? How do we get that customer into that feedback loop, right? So that's where that service management aspect is so key to pulling all that together.
Yeah, and I think it gets pretty granular, right? So if I'm on the ops side, I want to be informed about where development is in its release cycle and see that front and center and know that if something isn't working well, I have a pretty good indicator right up front whether a change caused that. And that's the first thing I need to look at. And on the reverse side, if there are, customer service issues, if there are defects, if there's slow performance, how do I get those defects back into my backlog and make sure that as we're addressing things, we have that front and center in being able to prioritize and then recognize when we actually make something improved. I want to remind everybody that we are taking questions at the end. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom to ask your questions. But I want to go into our next question because so much, it's become passé to talk about technology. And yet I feel like the technology really matters here. So I'm already using Jira software. Tell me about the Jira Service Desk integration with Jira software. What's the real benefit of being on one platform for all of IT and maybe even beyond IT to handle just the agile, the DevOps, and the IT operational side of things? Eddie, why don't you get us started on this one?
Yeah, sure. So actually, I think it really builds on the last point, the idea of closing this loop, right? And actually, I think of codifying the feedback loop so that I don't have to know who to chase down to get the information. We're all playing from this same pattern, right? And we know where to find the pieces of information that are important to us. And as a software developer for ages, we've talked about this, build, measure, learn cycle that we do within the software landscape. Mm-hmm. And we've seen similar in the DevOps landscape with that infinity graph, where it's all about it's a continual process, right? And that feedback of after deployment, after incidents, after operational joys occur, how do we feed that back into the teams? And the service desks end up being the place that capture so much of that information. But like was said, our DevOps teams are often totally disconnected from those service desks. And so to be able to really pull that together, and when your software team is looking at the same data, they might be more able to spot patterns in the incidents or patterns in the user defect that wouldn't make sense to a service desk agent because they don't know the application intimately like the software team does. But as you start to pull all those pieces together, it gives your folks that full picture that they need to be effective. And I think that the last thing I'll say is that, again, with it being in a single platform, it's adding this layer of knowledge and contextual awareness without necessarily having to search for it, right? Like, sure, it can be just shared, and searched for, but I think more importantly, it can be discovered, right? These tools are pushing the information to me. When I'm looking at a user story, it's also being pushed to me that it came from an underlying incident, and I can go back and get the context of that kind of stuff without really having to put in a lot of, mental mapping or thought process to get there.
Yeah, so it's more than just one platform. It's the end-to-end visibility. It's the context. It's being able to share information and using these tools as you work. And, so Thad, you have a lot of customers that are working with the Atlassian tool sets. Can you share some stories in terms of where customers are seeing the benefit of using 2, 3, and 4 different integrated tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the stories that comes to mind is we did a project for a mid-sized credit union, and the landscape's going to sound somewhat familiar. Is they wisely picked tools that were open platforms with APIs, so they could create interoperability between the tools, and so that starts off great with best intentions. It's a very easy share of data between tools, but the old story is these integrations take on a life of their own. And for them, they're starting to become focused on these integrations. And it was really about how are we making these integrations work? And we're spending a lot of dev cycles, a lot of processing time, focusing on integrated pieces versus solving actual business problems. We brought in Jira Service Desk and some of the Jira Atlassian tools and went with a full stack Atlassian approach, and it really, we carved out, hey, the vendor is going to start to handle these linkages problems, right? We're going to talk within the same platform. One of the things that I think is really, really interesting that when we first bring in Jira Service Desk is people say, well, where does Jira Service Desk run? And we say, well, it is Jira, right? It's in Jira, right? So it's so powerful to think that, hey, the workflows and all the way I'm defining my teams to work, the custom fields, the workflows, all of that pieces of knowledge are going to be in the same platform that my dev and my ops teams are working off of. It's really powerful. Another story that comes to mind is we were working with another team where they had an IT solution, and they were working basically out of email. Their service desk was so bad, the organization didn't want to adopt it. People would just shoot emails in. They also had a knowledge base that was out in a different spot that nobody'd ever checked, because it was, I knew if I had a problem, I'd go right into email and I'd shoot off an email and it'd get handled. When we put them back into one platform with Jira Service Desk, what they found was that their adoption was 85% of their tickets were now going through the portal. And because the knowledge base was also in the Atlassian tools in Confluence that hooks right into Jira, as soon as people started entering their issues, guess what? It would search the knowledge base. It would say, hey, here's some possible solutions for you. And they had a 20% reduction in tickets as well. So, I think when you start to think about what can the tools do for me versus what does my team have to cobble together and piece together, that's really, really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you went through some great examples there. I'll tell you, my favorite glue to in the Atlassian set is Confluence itself. I have my developers running on Jira. They know what they need to do in user stories. I have my ops working off of tickets. They know what they need to do. They know when incidents come in, when requests have to be managed. We know how to integrate the two, but then I can use Confluence to start creating some best practices, documenting procedures that need to actually be followed and other standards that need to be in there, and just creating a way of working that bridges the here and now that are coming through these tools to how we actually want to operate. So it becomes an entire ecosystem. Again, I want to remind everybody, we're going to be taking questions at the end, but let's go into some real weeds, some real hard problems that I know that IT operations and DevOps and Agile teams have when collaborating together. And I'm going to throw a different question to each of you, in terms of how this integrated solution really solved the thing. So Thad, let's talk about handling major problems. These are things that, are causing outages. We need to do root cause analysis. It's actually slowing down the business. How does being on one tool help us solve that a little bit more efficiently, or maybe resolve the issue more accurately, or certainly faster?
Yeah, it's a great question. And an incident gets everybody fired up and rallied up, and the visibility of an incident across the organization, across your customers is huge. So that's where being on one platform is definitely a game changer for a lot of folks. And when we talked about it, kind of building off the last question. So being on that one platform from an Atlassian perspective means, hey, we're looking at Opsgenie and we're looking at Status Page. So, how do those play into it? Well, when an incident's going on, you're getting hit all over the place. You're getting users raising tickets. You're getting servers throwing emails. You're getting applications throwing alerts. You're getting hit from all over the place, right? And the first thing you want to do is, okay, how do I take all that noise and make sense of it? And so Opsgenie can help aggregate that and say, hey, you know what? I've recognized an incident, and everything that's feeding in is going to be categorized under this incident so that the people focusing on the incident can work to resolution faster and be free from all of that noise. I think another key aspect that it's going to do is it's integrated tightly with Jira Service Desk. So imagine your users go to your service desk and say, hey, they want to type up that they're impacted by this incident. Guess what? There's an alert across the top that says, hey, we're undergoing this incident. Click here for more, and they click here for more, and it takes them to Status Page. So Status Page is all about letting your user community know exactly what's going on with your incident, allowing them to follow along at home. And all of these things work together. So as soon as that incident pops in Jira Service Desk, it doesn't take a human to make that happen. As soon as the incident pops in Opsgenie, it doesn't take a human to make it show up in Service Desk or even start the incident in Status Page. So you have this fully connected environment that really allows the team to stay focused on, let's get to resolution as fast as possible. I think it's the other thing that's really interesting. And when we talked about the landscape in the first part of the question and the first part of the session, was that Status Page can also aggregate that landscape. So it can pull information from Salesforce. So if Salesforce is having an incident, my sales team can see that on my Status Page, right? And it's really what it's really doing is, obviously we don't want incidents to happen, but what we really want, the faith and the trust of the organization, is that when they do, that we are a responsive organization and we have our hands around it. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, you're sounding more and more like a services and a software company. And so
Yeah.
maybe Eddie, help me out with my problem. Defects found in production. I want to close the loop and actually make sure they get resolved before they become repetitive customer issues. What are we doing differently there now?
Yeah, that's a good problem. I think especially as we're moving more quickly, right? The rate of defects you would think would increase along with that, but we certainly don't want them to. And I think it goes back to the problem we've been talking about, is there's a lot more noise in these environments because there's more dependencies and they're internal and external and all these things around us. So even when it's not a major incident, even if it's just that little annoying defect that users are suffering, it's still really hard to cut out that noise and get the signal you need to focus on. So what's the solution there? I think when we have this integrated data story, so when you can take the data from your DevOps tooling and you can tie that to Atlassian's service graph, and you can tie that to the alerts being aggregated by OpsGenie, now you can start to get a really full picture of what's happening, even for those little nuanced defects. And we can quickly identify, oh, well, maybe it was a change in this dependent service that just went out recently, and we can see that correlated here and the impact to that, and maybe we even roll back that dependent service. But we have all the insight there and visibility all being pumped into one place, that we can start to tie those patterns together. And I think more importantly, close that loop and make better decisions going forward, right? How might have we more easily detected and discovered this defect before it ever reached production to begin with?
Yeah, you're both speaking to this notion of all the data and all the information in one place. And I'm going to go back to my story of sitting through bridge calls and war rooms, trying to solve for the unknown. And most of what's happening is people are just going into their individual tools to figure out what's in this log file and what's in this monitoring tool. Did somebody make a deployment? And I think about, breaking down those silos, as Eddie says, and seeing everything or almost everything in one place and making it easier to solve a major incident. So many good things happen when you're living in one collaborative practice and one collaborative platform. And so maybe let's take that and go into our next question around our future vision. And let's talk about this, where we think this is going to be. We want to have agile and DevOps and IT ops really all working and living together. How do we get beyond just the culture and to the actual practices to make that a reality? So Thad, what are you seeing with your customers around that?
I'm going to harken back to what Chris from Evolve IP said, right? They had their aha moment, and their aha moment was DevOps wasn't the complete solution for them. They really needed development, operations, and service management, IT operations, IT management. That is really the three-legged stool on which delivering great solutions to their customers depended upon. So I think touched on it about getting past just a cultural aspect, but I think you really have to embrace that cultural aspect first. And that can be really hard in an organization. Is change is hard. Well, we've always done it this way, so let's continue to do it that way. I'd say challenging yourself. And I think that vision statement is really getting to your own aha moment. Like, what are those pieces and how powerful is that feedback loop to your organizations? What other barriers can you break down? Really come at it from a new perspective and really kind of shift your thinking on that topic.
So Eddie, tell me your vision. I'm in IT ops. What do I need? What am I looking for? What's your vision around that?
I think the big benefit is getting your weekends back, right? Like Thad said, DevOps, I think a lot of people have found wasn't the whole story, right? And I think it was never the goal. It was really means towards the goal. The goal was delivering more value faster, right? I think that's what this all has been about. And we've gotten better at throwing things over the wall faster, right? But now we're on the other side of that, and we're talking about service management and operations management. How do we kind of elevate the game there? And we talked about getting insight, right? Seeing what changed, who changed it, when it changed, and why is certainly going to help us in that reactive sense do a better job. But I think also in the proactive sense, being able to be smarter and actually look at, OpsGenie has deployment and DevOps reports built into it. How are your services actually doing? So what, they're deploying every single day or multiple times a day? Are they failing? Are they passing? Like, what's your success rate overall? And I think that enables us to shift the conversation a little bit and focus our energy on the services that need it most, which may not necessarily be our tier one services, right? It's going to be the ones that are struggling the most. And I think that's where we can really get ahead of this and try and be proactive about our service management in a way that has been pretty challenging in the past.
Yeah, I definitely like this notion of, getting to that third-legged stool, as Thad says, beyond just, DevOps automating our deployments and automating our infrastructure, but let's make IT ops successful. Let's get our weekends back, Eddie, as you're saying. Let's make problem resolution really easier. I love that as all part of our vision. We have some good questions here. Just a reminder, we'll take more. So let's wrap this up with a quick question. What do we want to say to the Agile and DevOps leaders about making the transition now? We always have too much on our plate. We just shifted to remote work. We're now going to go back to hybrid work. Why do we want to care about really upgrading to an integrated Agile DevOps and IT Ops platform today? Why don't you get us started on that?
Yeah, I'll keep it short. It's easy to get started. If a lot of people come to us because they love Jira and they know that, hey, there's this service desk thing on top of it. If you're already up and running on Jira, you can have a service desk running in 10 minutes. You can have a meaningful, you can have a meaningful deployment of a service desk in 2 to 4 weeks. It really is low code, no code. The parts that you're looking at are, what do we want in our service desk and how do we configure it? The configuration isn't the hard part. It's really about what problems are we trying to address and solve. And, it's really easy to get started. And I would just say, embrace what brought you to DevOps. Think about service management in that aspect too, and embrace that change.
Great. Eddie, what do you think?
Yeah, I think largely echoing what Thad said, it doesn't really have to be that hard, right? And even outside of the technology, I think our teams have shown over the past 10 years that they're good at culture change. So we have teams that have embraced Agile and DevOps as possible. And I think more recently, the COVID pandemic has taught us a few things. One of which is that our workforces are pretty resilient to change. We've taken entirely co-located workforces, made them 100% remote distributed teams, and are still delivering really great work. I think the other thing, though, is that we're learning we need to be much more responsive and aware of our customer feedback. Their needs are changing so quickly in this time that it's important that we can hear and respond to that feedback just as quickly. And I think integrating your service management is the key to do that. I think just like teams embrace DevOps once they really got it, have the light bulb moments, that I was talking about. Once your teams start to have these light bulb moments with this integrated service management, it's going to take off like wildfire.
Yeah, Eddie, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. I think the most important thing for fast and smart moving IT organizations today is to plug in that feedback loop, get closer to customers, understand the impacts and where they can make improvements. And so much of that is developing the end-to-end platform and processes to be able to do that efficiently. So let's take some questions. I got a couple of them here. They're not that easy. Let's start with Philip. Thank you, Philip, for the first question. He wants to know the benefits in trying to accelerate deliverables, and I think he means deliveries, for an organization that software is used not in the cloud, it's in a regulated industry. They do not want it fast as they require them to revalidate, and being too far behind makes them out of compliance. So, Thad, maybe take this one, this notion I'm not in the cloud yet. I'm still running in my data center, and I'm living in a compliant world, which needs to balance anything that I do to do faster. So why am I trying to go faster? What's the business benefit of doing that?
Yeah, and I think there's somewhat of a misnomer that you can't go even a little bit faster or have more efficiencies and have a better feedback loop. We work in a lot of highly regulated industries, regulated by financial compliance, regulated by FDA, medical devices. There is still a need to optimize and have a well understood process. Again, this is where faster doesn't mean not safer, right? You still want to go fast and safe and be able to prove that audit trail and have all of those pieces in place. So I think even those efficiencies are going to be really impactful to your team. And again, even if you're still, if it's releases per year, if you're going to go 1 to 2 to 3 releases, and you're gonna add more releases, I still don't think that puts a highly regulated industry at risk. We haven't seen that, and we still have that push from highly regulated clients, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, banks are regulated industries, and look at all the new tools and practices they had to put up to be able to respond to COVID. I mean, most organizations today have some form of compliance, and I don't think the value comes from trying to go 90 miles per hour if your end users need you to go 15 miles per hour. But we do know, if we have to get something out there quickly and we need to be able to measure its impact and experiment, we need some mechanisms to do that. In CAB meetings that have 100 people attending them and manual deployment processes are the things that were acceptable in the past, but make it really difficult for us to do things in the future. So I think it's not necessarily about running 100 miles an hour, but I think it's always about, what do we have to do to be a little bit more efficient, be a little bit more reliable, and be able to impact customers a little bit more faster.
And I just want to add to that is a little bit what Eddie said earlier in the conversation too, which is codifying process, right? I mean, there's a lot of value in having your process codified, for sure.
Yeah. So Charlton has a good follow-up question for Eddie around this. The question is, what suggestions do you have to incorporate more proactive measures to both detect and automate actions to cut down on the reactive work?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is a good question.
It's a great question.
I think the key thing, I mean, we've been talking a lot about information today, right? And we've been talking about kind of merging, your service insight and your DevOps tooling insight. And I think if you think about the leaps and bounds we've made in observability over the past few years, right? We found out that, structured logging and transaction tracing are two hugely valuable activities you can do within your portfolio to help you on, some proactive measures. I think an interesting trend that's happening now is don't look for the patterns that are likely to cause an incident, but almost trying to flip it and look for the patterns that are missing from a healthy business operation. So in the past, like an example, we used to be concerned if our queue depth got over 40,000 messages. That means it's going to run out of memory soon and crash. But what if our queue depth is 0 messages? There's probably something wrong in the system that's not putting messages on those queues. And so I think teams are doing a much better job of kind of looking at all the ways and ways or aspects they can monitor their systems, and then pump that into a system like Opsgenie that's going to deduplicate it and is going to consolidate it and organize it in a way, and maybe even run automated playbooks by itself. I mean, one thing I love about Opsgenie is you can have it take specific actions based on specific alerts before someone from your operation team ever gets on. And maybe that automatically resolves the alert because it was something that could be solved automatically. You learn from that, you feed it into this feedback loop we've been talking about, make sure your developers get a story to address it moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, some really good examples there. I mean, some things that come to my mind. Every time you do a release, you should be putting in new monitoring as part of that release. It has new capabilities, something to look for there. I think about documenting standard procedures. Eddie talked about logging. I don't want to look at a log file without a key and understanding what the log messages mean and how to respond to problems there when they come up. I really like Thad's example earlier of status page. When people can look up at a status and say whether something is in problem mode or not, and self-service answers around that. I think that's being really proactive. So I think it's really just thinking a few steps ahead and then looking at the tooling around you to say, what can we go implement? Wow, it's 1:40 already Eastern time. I want to thank our panelists, Eddie and Thad, for joining us. Just a few things to know how you guys can all follow up. First and foremost, check out the blog series, the ITSM blog at isostech.com/ITSM. There's a whole bunch of posts there, including one of my posts about reducing the cab that I hope you'll get value from. I want you to get your weekends back. It's so key to have that work-life balance and to be able to say that when you deploy things reliably, that they're running efficiently in the production environment. It's also important to show that your tools can be used effectively. So reach out to isostech.com/contact-isos. I think those URLs are showing up in the chat window. They're going to be able to do that demo for you and show you how to set up a service desk in 10 minutes. You can also call ISOS Technology at 480-366-5784. Again, I'm Isaac Sokolik. On behalf of ISOS Technology and Atlassian and Star CIO, thank you for joining us, and let's continue to work to improve the collaboration between Agile, DevOps, and IT Ops groups. Thank you, and have a great day.